Not surprising, the PAC-10 file a motion opposing Washington State and Oregon State's preliminary injunction. Let's talk about it.
Conference realignment is always in the news, so we're back on the Big Mountain to discuss this topic and how it may affect the Big Ten and the Mountain West moving forward.
All right, I am JY. This is my good friend Steve. We have been on this PAC-12 debacle since for a couple months now. I don't want to say since the beginning, because the beginning was a long, long time ago.
Yes.
But for the past few months, specifically looking at Washington State and Oregon State and kind of where they're at with this, what they're trying to do through the courts, and kind of give our opinions of where things have been. So just last week, the University of Washington filed a motion opposing Washington State and Oregon State's motion for a preliminary injunction. That motion would give these two schools full control over the conference. So not at all surprising that they would have done this in terms of a motion to oppose. And I'm not going to go through the motion, but there are about 2 or 3 things that I really want us to look at and talk about. The first one is some unreported events that came out in this motion that I believe are documented, basically showing that all the schools, including Washington State and Oregon State, were all trying to get to another conference or become a member of another conference. I think up until now it's been a little bit of poor Washington State and Oregon State were left behind. And clearly that's where they're at now. They have not been able to join another conference for whatever reason. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But they were doing the same things according to this, and I'm going to lay out a few things that everybody was doing. So the first one is on July 30th, the Oregon State president spoke with the University of Virginia president about joining the ACC. August 5th, the Washington State president, who we've talked about many times because he is the board of director president for the Pac-12, but August 5th, he proposed to both Cal and Stanford that the 4 schools, so at that time it would have been Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State, join the Big 12. Thirdly, the Oregon State president sent apparently numerous texts to the AD, Barnes, pursuing membership in the Big 12 as late August or even early September. So it's interesting. Apparently, these are documented. They actually have proof of the texts and the emails and however those things were done. But up until now, everybody was very focused on obviously what has been made public in terms of where these other schools are going. Oregon State and Washington State, quite frankly, were doing the same thing. Unfortunately for them, no other conference up until right now could happen, but no other conference has accepted them yet. So I found that to be very interesting, very telling. We haven't heard that yet, and I'm sure there's probably more than just those 3 cited instances of this. But what's your take on that, Steve?
Yeah, it doesn't really surprise me, even though we haven't necessarily heard the details of it yet. I've made the point since we first started talking about this that once USC and UCLA left, that the conference was basically dead conference walking. Yeah. It was a zombie conference still operating. And I don't really blame any of the universities for looking for, because these university presidents, they have a fiduciary duty to the schools and to their boards and to the universities to make the best moves that help out financially for their school. So it doesn't surprise me. Yeah. It does take a little bit of you can't always just claim to be a victim when you're doing it. But I will say again, I think all of this started with USC and UCLA, taking away that major market, and right. So it doesn't surprise me that they did this. And we have heard them say since we've heard them say publicly since the everyone else left, basically, that they really felt like they wanted to be in a Power 5 conference, whether that was to rebuild the PAC or to join another Power 5 conference. So doesn't surprise me, but I do think it just maybe takes the victim thing down a notch.
100%. And we're going to get into rebuilding the Pac-12 here in a moment with my third item that I want to bring up. But it definitely, when I read that, again, if you step back, you say, that's not surprising. They were all doing it. We've talked about the backdoor deals, the backstabbing, the all of that. Our last one was on, or was it 2 times ago? We talked about the media rights deal with Apple. That was everybody was in agreement one night, and the very next morning, Oregon and Washington left, and the whole thing blew up.
Right.
So there's gobs of backstabbing here. I guarantee you. I mean, I listed 3 potential documented. There would be many more than that. But yes, it definitely kind of turns the tide a little bit on the victim mentality, or at least posturing that Oregon State and Washington State are at. I still, again, completely feel for those universities.
Yes.
That doesn't change my opinion on that.
Yeah.
But it not surprising, but definitely shines a little light on that too. So the next 2 items, one is I want to talk specifically about some items that were in the motion, and then some items that were in the public statement that was issued by as we've called them before, treasonous 10.
Yeah.
But the 10 schools that are leaving. So what's that?
I like that term.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the motion, the motion is to maintain the 12-member schools for 23 and 24, whereas revenue for this year, the year that we're currently in, and the Pac-12 is the Pac-12. There's 10 schools still competing in and should be sharing revenues in the PAC. And they say they should be shared equally. In the motion, there's claims that all members long ago, I don't know what that means, long ago, 2 years ago, maybe when USC, UCLA left, I don't know, but long ago, agreed that current year revenues are shared evenly among the members. To me, that makes complete sense. I think that's what these schools are getting at, and when we get to the item 3 here, we'll dive into that here a bit more. The other item that was in the motion, again, and we've talked about this, but despite the claims that Commissioner K sent these letters, and it's very well documented that he has told USC and UCLA and Colorado, for that matter, that they're no longer members. They were never actually removed from the board. Now, our last go around with this, in terms of the motion for preliminary injunction, we talked about the evidence that OSU and WSU proposed that showed that they were removed. If you want to see that, you can go back to that episode. But the claims here in this motion, they were never actually removed. They were just left out of, and this is what we've heard several times, left out of the discussions and the board meetings around future media rights deals. So just a couple things in the motion that kind of push back, one regarding revenues in the current year, 23-24, and also whether or not USC and UCLA were truly removed from the conference, or from the board at least. So anything on those 2 items, Steve?
As far as the agreeing to share all the revenues and that it happened, that's very vague claims.
Yes, it is vague.
Long ago. So who agreed to that? How was it agreed to? I'd love to see more information, and they're making this claim, so you would think if we do move forward, they would have to back up and substantiate that. So I'd really like to see. Now, I think on the surface, it does make sense that, okay, they're all participating this year, so revenues this year would be split evenly. Mm-hmm. However, we've also talked, you first brought up the issue of liabilities.
Yeah.
So I think there could be a room for a counter argument that if the 2 remaining schools are staying with the PAC and they're trying to keep it together, and if there are liabilities, assets and liabilities have to balance out. Mm-hmm. So maybe some of that revenue is needed to take. So basically, those schools that left, they were part of creating those liabilities, those debts, so to speak. So and if there is a settlement, I'm sure that's something that would be worked out. Just like we used the divorce analogy before. Right. You don't just split the money, you also split the debts and the liabilities. So yes, on the surface, it makes sense to break up all that revenue evenly. However, if the conference is going to stay together, maybe some of that revenue will have to be directed to kind of compensate for those 2 holding on to those liabilities of the conference and the debts.
Well, I guess I would say that's a post-2024 issue. That's not necessarily a 23-24. Now, if those liabilities come to pass by the end of this media rights deal, then yes, I agree with you. But if these are ongoing, those are liabilities of the PAC. And
new liabilities.
So I mean, certainly a settlement makes that potentially go away because it's part of the settlement. But yeah, I mean, to me, this only makes sense that 23-24 is shared revenues and liabilities and expenditures. I mean, clearly everybody's focused on the revenues.
Because we still have, I believe we still have that debt from Comcast where we have indications the previous commissioner knew about this and kicked the can down the road.
Correct.
So revenues and liabilities, there's definitely some things that need to work out.
So let's get to the last one, which to me is the biggest piece of this whole thing. And to me sheds light on, what are they trying to get at? What are the treasonous 10 trying to get at here? So this comes from the public statement of the 10 that was released as part of this motion or after they filed the motion. And it says, and I quote, "We note that Oregon State and Washington State will still control roughly $200 million in conference revenue after our 10 schools depart the conference. The motion states that the Pac-12 expects $100 million in revenues both in 24-25 and 25-26. I don't want to talk liabilities right now. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. But I do want to focus on that statement. To me means that the treasonous 10 know that they're done. They're not looking for anything past this year.
Sure.
Like expenditures be expenditures and revenues be revenues. And if there's a net gain, so to speak, we should get our fair share of that net gain. But effective the end of this year, the end of this school year, fiscal year, it's all Oregon State and Washington State's money to have and potentially liability. Again, I want to focus on revenues and assets, money to have. And I find that to be very interesting because I think for most of the time, a lot of this has been, the speculation has been they want to either A, dissolve the conference completely and whatever the net assets are at the end, we all get an equal share and we're done, which basically OSU and WSU just get shafted on. But that's not what, to me, that's not how I read this, and I'm not sure that's what the treasonous 10 are really trying to get at. They want to make it whole through this year, and then it'll be what it is. I think the liabilities is a whole other issue. I don't want to go down that.
Yeah.
But I think it makes it clear what their expectations are for this year and the future.
Yeah. Yeah, so... well, we're now at step what? We talked about this was going to be a march of 1,000,000 miles, and the first hearing was step 1. We're now at step 6, 7 down the road.
Yeah.
And at this point, they're saying basically, well, there's going to be more revenue. They're really, the treasonous 10 are trying to make their case that where's the dividing line? Right. Obviously, this is a big pie of money that's going to be divided.
Yeah.
And so they're fighting over where the dividing line is.
Yeah.
And the 10 that are leaving want to make the divided line at the end of when they stop competing within. Okay?
Yes.
Whereas Washington State and Oregon State are saying, no, the dividing line is when you announce to the world that you are leaving,
right,
based on our bylaws. And so those 2 points are about a whole season different. And so we got one side here, one side there, and which again leads me to believe that all this is going to come down to a settlement. They're going to go somewhere in the middle, where maybe everyone's unhappy, but everyone gets a little piece of the pie. They take care of those. But I agree with you. I think it is significant because, before this, all of the thought was that the 10 that were leaving just wanted to get rid of the conference, basically.
Right. Yes.
And which I actually think that would have been the simplest solution for them. And it's very likely that if they would not have gotten the temporary restraining order, that's what the conference would have been done, because they could have just made all of this go away, basically gone in 10-2, gotten rid of the conference, basically just set up for the bills to be paid for the rest of this year.
Right.
But on June 1st or whatever, the conference is done, all the money will be split up, and they could have easily done that 10-2.
Yeah.
So that was maybe their plan originally, but now they've come. We've seen the fight, we've seen the back and forth. They realize that's not going to happen.
Right.
And this seems to be a kind of their next step in the negotiation process, being a little bit more reasonable, saying, okay, let's just divide the revenue of this year while we're still competing. After that, it's yours. Whatever comes in after that, we're not going to make a claim towards it.
Right.
And I think they would be hoping that maybe after that. After this motion, that maybe Oregon State and Washington State would be willing to come towards them a little bit.
Sure.
But again, really what we're talking about is this whole big pie of money, how it's going to be split. That's the easiest way to simplify it. And one side thinks it should be split over here. One side thinks it should be split over there.
Yeah.
we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. The last thing I want to add here is some rumors that I've been seeing and reading. I don't know if there's any truth to this. This is pure speculation and rumor. But it is that money, so let's just say that they come to a settlement and that both Oregon State and Washington State have $100 million in revenues, well, 50-50, $50 million each. But let's just say the PAC-12.
Right.
Let's make it easy. The PAC-12, which is really the PAC-2 at that point, has $100 million in revenues for the next 2 years. So,
right.
So for 24-25 and 25-26. I've seen some speculation that money, in part, could be used to help pay other schools' exit fees in order to get them to join the PAC-2, PAC-8, whatever it's going to become. I find that interesting. I don't know how that would necessarily work, but if they have this pot of money that they're going to have kind of free and clear of anyone else, and they want to continue down this path of trying to have a PAC moving forward, could that be money that they could give to other schools to help them bridge that gap between where they are now and whatever those exit fees are for their current conference moving forward? And I just want to throw a side note in there for Mountain West, because there's been a lot of speculation and talk about maybe the top 6, so to speak, ish, of the Mountain West and a few others maybe doing that. Again, pure speculation, zero evidence as to this happening. But the Mountain West exit fees are $17 million per school if you're outside of a year. Mm-hmm. They're $34 million if you're inside of a year. Mm-hmm. So even at $17 million, that's a pretty hefty exit fee for a Mountain West school that currently is making about $4 million in their TV deal.
Right.
That's a hefty exit fee for them.
Yes.
The other thing I would say is the Mountain West bylaws require 3/4 vote for dissolution. Again, I have seen so much talk about the Mountain West dissolving and these schools leaving and going to the PAC-8. A 3/4 vote. Why would the bottom half, I hate to call them that, but half of the schools even entertain something like that? Now, if a school wants to exit after the media rights deal and the school that's on them, and maybe there's a few of them that want to do that. Yeah. I see nothing right now that leads me to believe that even half, let alone 3/4, would vote to dissolve the Mountain West. That is pie in the sky stuff. Yep. You mentioned that all of this is Oregon State and Washington State wanting to stay with a Power 5. Mm-hmm. That's all this is. The Mountain West isn't a Power 5. They're a very strong group of 5. Yep. Adding Oregon State and Washington State would get them even closer to Power 5 status, I believe. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing that leads me to believe any of these rumors of speculation have any sort of sense of reality to them. The Mountain West does not have to bow down to Oregon State and Washington State at this point. Things can change. I'm speaking for where we sit right now. Yeah. But I just wanted to bring that in. We really haven't talked about that before, but there's been a lot. I've seen a lot of that speculation and rumor, and I leave it just at that. Pure speculation, pure rumor, people wanting more than is actually there. So
I have some thoughts on that.
Please.
Okay. So first of all, I think that pot of revenue, and I think it's why it's been so important that Oregon State and Washington State, it's important for them to keep the PAC as an entity because they have those guarantees of 2 years of revenue coming in.
Right.
So, that is, that's huge leverage for them if they can keep that. Mm-hmm. So it gives them a lot of options, okay? Can they maybe go and try and steal back some teams from the Big 12?
Sure. Yeah.
We haven't really looked in depth in that. Is that something that they look at? You mentioned the Mountain West of trying to poach from the Mountain West. Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. So there's only 2 schools in the PAC. There's only going to be 2 schools. How many is the Mountain West? 14 schools? 12 schools. Okay. Yeah. Well, 14 is a pretty good number for a conference.
Yes, it is.
So the focus, and I know people in the Mountain West, you love the Mountain West is a beloved conference to many people. Yes. And so I think people are scared, and then people start to get to talking about rumors and innuendo. It makes them scared. What makes sense to me, it gives them a lot of opportunities, but to me what it makes sense is, can that money be used to facilitate some kind of a merger?
Sure.
People want to look at it as poaching from the Mountain West. Well, what if they can merge? Because liabilities are important. We talked about there might have some liabilities and things. There might be some, money can make deals happen kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So What if they can use that money to entice the Mountain West to merge? Maybe get them out of their TV deal that they're in or whatever into a new conference. And whether they call that I know, we people who love the Mountain West, we want to keep that Mountain West name. Whether it's a new called the PAC-West or something, whatever.
I like the PAC-West. Of all the ones that I've heard, I like the PAC-West.
Yeah. So I think that's another option. Is it gives them options. That would be another option. Now, as far as the Power Five are concerned, here's what I really think the presidents of Oregon State and Washington State have done a great job through this process of advocating for their schools, and they're going to continue to do that for their student athletes and for their schools. I think the focus on Power Five is very short-sighted, and here's why. We're really headed towards, and we're not even headed. We're almost there to a Power Two between the Big Ten and the SEC, especially if in the next year or two the Big Ten continues to move now over towards expansion down the East Coast and take some ACC teams. If you took the current Mountain West and you added Washington State and Oregon State, to me, they would be right there competitive with a Big 12 that doesn't have Texas or Oklahoma anymore, with an ACC that doesn't have Florida State, North Carolina, Clemson anymore. So to me, it's a year from now, 2 years from now, it's going to be the Big Two and everybody else.
Maybe Big Two, middle three, bottom whatever's left, 6 or whatever it is. I don't know. But yes, Big Two and everybody else. Basically.
For all intents and purposes, Big Two and everybody else. Where I think whatever new conference, whether it's the Mountain West or a combined Pac-West, they would have a real fighting shot to be one of the top schools, like right there with the Big 12 and the ACC, to be that best of the rest kind of thing.
Sure.
So I think that it gives them a lot of opportunities. I know people are afraid for the worst, and I totally get that. But I look at it as opportunities instead of things to be fearful of. So that's just my perspective on that. I will say the last thing that I want to point. It's a point that you've made before. Both of the presidents of those two schools have talked about regionality, and however it's rebuilt, however it's merged, whatever it's called, it just makes so much sense from their perspective, that regionality perspective of the Mountain West with those two schools. So that's my last thought on there.
Well, but does it if they want to join the ACC and the Big 12? I have to throw that zinger in there to bring us home, to come full circle on the text that happened. And again, that was all. We've talked about this before. That was all happening so fast.
Yes.
Every man's
they
fighting for
every possibility.
You're just doggy paddling to hopefully survive. So maybe that's a bit of an unfair shot for me, but I kind of had to throw that in.
But what they've said consistently since the
things have settled.
Is regionality. They've talked. Both presidents have mentioned that over and over again.
Good point. Hey, with that, it's been a bit of a time since we got to the Pac-12. I'm glad we were able to do this. We'll certainly keep on it. We are not a breaking news type of channel. We are more of a let's tell you what's in there. We like to digest it a little bit and then bring you our hopefully educated opinions on this, whether right or wrong.
Have a discussion.
You can be the judge. Have a discussion. So with that, hey, we appreciate it. If you're interested in pick videos, we just released our Week 11 picks, so you can check that out on our channel. We're also following the Michigan scandal, so I'm sure there'll be more coming out on that here very, very soon. With that, we appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.